The word assuaged means to sink down. The water did not soak into the ground, and it did not dry back up into the atmosphere. The atmosphere couldn't hold that much water. And I'm sure Mr. Till will bring that out. It couldn't rain that much, and there's not enough water in the oceans to cover the earth. Well, there's enough water in the oceans right now to cover the earth 12,000 feet deep. If the earth were smoothed out, if the mountains were pushed down and the valleys, the oceans weren't as deep, if the earth were smooth, the water would be 12,000 feet, over 2 miles deep, over the entire surface of the globe. There is plenty of water in that ocean to flood the world. Psalms chapter 104 talks more about the flood. The Bible says, God laid the foundations of the earth that it should not be removed forever. Thou coverest it with the deep. That's the ocean, the flood. God covered the earth with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. There have always been skeptics who say, well, it was a local flood. Look, you don't get a local flood with the water going over the mountains. Plus, if it's a local flood, why did God tell Noah to build a boat? Why didn't he say, Noah, move? There's going to be a flood. It was a worldwide flood. At the voice of at thy rebuke, they fled. They referring to the water. The water fled. At the voice of thy thunder, they hasted away. The water raced away. You say, where's it going to go? If the world's covered with water, water seeks its own level, where's it going to go? Keep reading, verse number 8. They go up by the mountains, they go down by the valleys unto the place which thou hast founded for them. Thou hast set a bound that they may not pass over, that they turn not again to cover the earth. This phrase, they go up by the mountains, is an Old English phrase. Today's language would more likely say it like this. The mountains ascend, the valleys descend. Many reference Bibles say that. The mountains ascend, the valleys descend. What I believe happened after the flood, the crust of the earth, being very thin and flexible, the crust of the earth sank in the skinnier spots. The thinner places on the earth's crust sank down. The crust of the earth is thinner than the skin of an apple compared to the apple, as far as proportion. Very thin. I taught earth science for years. Under the continents, the crust is about 25 miles thick. Under all of the ocean basins, the crust is 3 to 5 miles thick. Much thinner. I believe that's the thin spots that sank down, the mountains lifted up, and the water raced off into the holes, carving features like Grand Canyon and Badlands in a matter of hours, because you had enormous volumes of water moving through soft sediment. The rock layers were formed, the sediment layers were deposited during the year-long flood. As the mountains lifted up and the valleys sank down, the more cracks appeared in the earth, and it might be a coincidence, but all of the mountain ranges in the world follow the coastlines. Just look at your globe. Mountain ranges follow the coastlines. Oceans sank down, the mountains lifted up. Some of the mountains lifted up slower, leaving behind smooth, rounded mountains like the Appalachians. Some lifted up faster, leaving behind rugged mountains like the Rockies. The earth cracked up into plates, either because of the impact of the meteor or because the fountains of the deep broke up right there, or later on, a year later, when the mountains arose. There are 3 possibilities of when the cracks and mountain ranges appeared. Rock strata that are found bent like this all over the world are a very common feature. You don't bend rock layers like that. Twisted, contorted rock layers, they had to be bent while they were soft mud. As the mountains arose and the valleys sank down, those layers were formed. The water ran off, forming features like that. The entire top of Mount Everest, the top 3,000 feet of that mountain, is covered with sedimentary rock packed full of remains of animals that once lived in the sea. Seashells, clams in the closed position are found on top of Mount Everest, tallest mountain in the world. Mount Everest wasn't there before the flood. Mount Everest rose up after the flood. The Himalayan range didn't exist until after the flood. The earth didn't have any giant mountain ranges, and it didn't have any deep ocean basins. So the argument will come up, well, hey, is there enough water, could it rain enough to cover Mount Everest? No, you're thinking of the wrong world. Scoffers are ignorant of what the original creation was like, and they're ignorant of the flood. The mountains rose after the flood, and the valleys sank down. The water raced off into those holes. Is there another? Yeah, switch to the next one there real quick, brother. I got about, how much, 4 minutes left?
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to get through this Mount St. Helens real quickly and give you an example of what might happen. So the people will say that the idea of the worldwide flood is impossible. Haven't really studied the evidence. There is sedimentary rock all over the world, and petrified clams in the closed position are very common. And I'll have to skip some of this, but the center part of the oceans, the abyss, is the deep part. The other part is called the continental shelf, where it's not as deep. About half of the ocean, here, at least at the Arctic Ocean, is the abyss. The other half is continental shelf. The oceans were smaller after the flood, I believe, for a while, because the textbooks all say here, millions of years it took the Colorado River to carve the Grand Canyon from solid rock. Well, they're basing that on a couple of faulty assumptions. They're basing on the assumption that the Colorado River didn't start on it until after the rock was solid rock. If it was all soft mud, and those are obviously mud layers turned to solid rock, then the erosion would be very rapid. Mount St. Helens did that. When it blew in 1980, the top of the mountain began to blow, and then the north slope slid down. And the volcano made a mudslide, scalding hot mud and ash slid down for many miles. Matter of fact, this computer image, the mud slid all the way down and blocked off the Toutle River. Here's a picture of the mud dam blocking off the Toutle River. 5 days later, the water backed up over the top and went over the top of the dam. Here you have lots of water behind a soft mud dam, and erosion was very rapid. It carved a canyon 140 feet deep, 1,000 feet wide, 2,000 feet long, and it carved it out in 15 minutes. When the scientists went down into the canyon after water got back to stabilize, they noticed the canyon's sides of it were all stratified, all nice, neat layers. That's because as the mud flowed in, hydrologic sorting automatically separates the particles by density. Heavier stuff went to the bottom, and you can go there today, and some geologists will say, oh, this bottom layer is 800 million years old. And it was all formed in 1980, rapidly. Textbooks always say the Grand Canyon is kind of puzzling because it loops like a slow gradient. Mississippi loops and meanders around because it's low gradient, but it also has steep sides like a fast-moving high gradient stream. They say it's kind of puzzling. How did this canyon form? Well, see, they're thinking of it all wrong. The Colorado River did not make Grand Canyon. The flood made Grand Canyon. The Colorado River just happens to flow through the crack, that's all. The logs that were floated in the Spirit Lake, here's Mount St. Helens in the background, the logs floated 3 square miles of logs floated there. Many of them got waterlogged and began to float in the upright position and then sank to the bottom. Remember I showed you the polystrata trees running through all the different layers of strata? That formed during the flood. All those layers deposited rapidly. Mount St. Helens is doing the very same thing for us today. Scuba divers go under there and say there are 20,000 logs in the bottom of Spirit Lake right now, stuck in the mud. All over the world you can find tree trunks petrified in the standing position. Yellowstone has hundreds of them. If they fall over, they will break. And you go through any petrified forest and you'll see the tree probably petrified standing up and then fell over a couple of hundred years later. I think my time is up. After the flood, the waters assuaged and the waters returned from off the earth. The water, as the mountains rose and the valleys sank down, the water would tend to race back and forth for a while. It says that in Genesis chapter 3. And the secondary erosion would take place as the layers were wiped off and new layers deposited on top from the waters going back and forth. It wasn't safe for Noah to get out of the ark for a short time. And all of these features of this millions of years ago stuff ought to be illegal in our textbooks. It has nothing to do with science, and you cannot prove those layers are millions of years old. That whole geologic column is the Bible to the evolutionist, and it's a fraud, it's a hoax, it does not exist any place. That book, The Bible Explanation, The Worldwide Flood, is the best, most reasonable explanation of all the features we see on this world today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Hovind. I fully intended to say at the beginning of this debate that, as has been shown already, I would expect you to give your kind attention to both of our speakers, and please be mindful that they are holding the floor and that we need to give them the utmost in respect and the allowance of the full use of their time. So at this time, we'll hear from Mr. Till.
Dr. Hovind, Mr. Helens, and ladies and gentlemen. I want to begin by expressing my appreciation for the opportunity to be here. I think it's very commendable that this congregation is willing to invite me here because it has to know that I'm going to say some things that are directly opposed to what this church stands for. And